It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza.
Hello, Irwin.
Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Thank you. So, last week I took with East Hampton Trails, we do these, as you know, these historical walks every other Wednesday. And we did a hike in Georgica. We love Georgica, right?
Beautiful place. Actually, when my family first came to East Hampton, we stayed in Georgica area.
Nice.
Got lost in the Georgica area in the fog where it smelled like strawberries and ocean. I mean, what's better than that?
That is, I'm going to close my eyes and think about that right now. Strawberries and ocean. I love it. I love it. So anyway, what I do on these is I sort of pick out destinations where we can sort of go to. We walk about usually somewhere between 3 and 4 miles, and we stop at a couple of sites. Obviously, we're in Georgica. There's a couple of obvious stops, the ocean, the Georgica Cove, the obvious, but there are some gems there. And one of them is a big preserve run by the Nature Conservancy called Fulling Mill. It's on Briar Patch Road.
Okay, yeah.
Here's the really cool thing about this, Esperanza. This, like so much of all of these areas, was farmland, but we made a post about this on Instagram, about this. And what was so shocking, now remember, we're here in Georgica, we're steps from Georgica Pond, we're walking distance to the Atlantic Ocean. So from the files of good is always good, this was always good. It was never not good. And yet this was a dairy farm that was actually farming as late as 1959.
Love it. I mean, that's incredible. Yeah.
Now, and it's the post itself, that's sort of how it was couched. It's hard to wrap your arms around the fact that in this location, and remember, this
now
was
dotted with estates and gated,
right.
gated.
And we're not talking 1890, we're talking 1959.
Yes.
I was born in 1957. Theoretically, I could have been there.
So within your lifetime, yes.
Within my lifetime. It's not ancient history. And that was being farmed, and actually was being not farmed into the 60s, but it really continued on through 1970 as just farmland. But 59, and as legend had it, it was a dairy farm. And the milk was actually their big customer was Southampton Hospital.
Wow.
So all of the milk that was being made there was made by Southampton Hospital. And thankfully, this is now a preserve. Of course, I guess Briar Patch Road is maybe more famous or infamous now as the home of Beyonce and Jay-Z, but Our Hamptons doesn't go down those
I'm
roads.
so out of the loop.
we don't go down those roads. Those are roads you could find elsewhere. But anyway, so
it's a preserve. It's the Nature Conservancy. Do you know what time?
The Nature Conservancy started preserving it. The land was, as I said, cultivated as late as 1970. Though the dairy ended around 59. Mm-hmm. And through a series of gifts by an Augusta Robinson between 72 and 76, this land, which is about 17 and a half acres right now, was acquired at that time. So it's been preserved now for, this is its 50th year of preservation.
Thank you, Augusta.
Exactly. Thank you, Augusta.
And the Nature Conservancy.
And the Nature Conservancy, although their stewardship of the land is a little disappointing. It's and I actually spoke to them when I was doing this walk. I called their office and they said, well, we get on there about once a year to mow. I said, once a year?
Yeah.
I don't know why they're not reaching out to the village or even the Trail Society to help them with this, because the public access is, while it's open space, it's sort of limiting because it's overgrown.
It's
grass
challenging. Yeah.
and ticks and everything else there's no clear paths. But slow and steady will hopefully win the race, and we're going to get there. But as cool as Fulling Mill Farm Preserve was, I have to tell you the coolest part of this walk. And anyone can still go see this house. It's at 72 Apaquogue Road. This is not a private street. You can walk, bike ride, drive by there. It's called the Apaquogue. You saw the pictures of it. You probably have been by, but what was your first take when you saw those pictures?
It's just such a beautiful, I don't know. It's that true Hampton style that nobody does anymore. It really just speaks to, it really makes me want to stay there, which and we are about to tell you the history of this place.
Excellent segue, because that's exactly where we're going with this. That, just to give you a little history of it, this house was originally again, remember, we were talking about farmland here. This was originally a 107-acre farm on Apaquogue Road. And there was a boarding house that was built there, and it was sold. We're going back now to 1882, and it was sold to a Mrs. E.A. LaForest. This house, as an FYI, is on Apaquogue Road, just beyond LaForest Lane in Georgica. So now that boarding house did burn down, but the Apaquogue, as we see it now, was in its place. Now, to describe the Apaquogue, and we will post a picture of this on our Instagram page because it has to be seen to be believed. It is a 10,550 square foot main house that, now this goes back to that story. They were always building big in certain sections, but it was
a boarding house.
But that's the point. Yes. The point of the story is this was not built as an homage to me.
Did I steal your punchline?
Right. Look at me. Look at what I've done, that I can have a house like this. It was built as a boarding house. The Apaquogue, 16 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms. And there was even living space in the basement. So this was for boarders. And here's a funny story. So now remember, this was around 1884. In 1909, the owner of the house, this is Mrs. E.A. LaForest, wanted to sell it, Esperanza, and put an ad in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, which I think may actually still exist, believe it or not. But anyway.
Yeah, I have heard of it.
Exactly. I'm from Queens. I don't know much about Brooklyn. But anyway, in May of 1909, and the ad said, "Hotel for sale. The hotel or boarding house at East Hampton, known as the Apaquogue, will accommodate 30 boarders. Large stable, 3.5 acres of good land, half-mile from the ocean. Terms reasonable for prompt sale." And the interested parties would contact a Joseph S. Osborne. No surprise there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Osborne with an E.
Exactly correct. Probably of the Osbornes of Wainscott. There was a big Osborne.
Or more so of East Hampton.
More so of East Hampton.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. What I find interesting with what you've just said, and not to break up your story, but I'm reading about this listing of this house more recently. And when you're saying 30 boarders and all the people that this house can accommodate, or boarding house, the family that was living there apparently outgrew the house.
Yeah, I would think.
That's what it says. So how you can outgrow a house with that many bedrooms, I have a hard time. But anyway,
it is hard to explain now. So after this classified ad, a Mrs. A.A. Carter bought the Apaquogue, and then a Julian and Myrick bought it in 1919. And according to everything I've researched, that was the last buyer until it sold. So to your point, the Myrick family, heirs, whomever, have owned this house for over 100 years.
Years, yeah. And apparently have outgrown it.
Apparently have outgrown it, whatever that means.
Yes.
But so
I'm moving in, Irwin.
Oh my God. That would be like, could you imagine?
And I'll rent out the rooms.
Could you imagine operating? Could you imagine operating a boarding house in East Hampton right now? I mean, that's I don't know.
Too bad that wasn't grandfathered, right?
I don't know if that would be a Saturday Night Live skit or just a we would be drummed out of town. I'm not sure which, but in that neighborhood. But it did lead. So to your point, the property is for sale. The property sold. It was originally asking, I think, $16.9 million for it. It's on 3.5 acres. The one positive, if we want to call it a positive, because the likelihood of this property lasting as we know it is slim to none. We can dream.
Yes, that someone will respect this history that is so significant.
And not only so significant, sort of an off the radar history. It's funny. I sort of stumbled on this. You know, I always do like a walk before the walk just to check the neighborhood out. And I went with Rachel, my wife, and we walked over there and we just walked by and we saw this house. I said, wow, this is extraordinary. And I took a picture of the number so I'd remember. And then that's how I found out about the Apaquogue. So it really fell in my lap. When I advertised this hike, actually, I didn't even mention it. So it did fall in our lap. And that's when I learned so much about it. Now, the positive is they can't subdivide this land. So the one positive of this whole thing is the 3.5 acres will only support one house. So,
well, yeah, the negative is that realtors love selling these properties by saying the new owner could restore the house, move it on the property and expand, or build their own new 10,500 square foot house and make their own history.
Yet another perfect segue. That's exactly where we were going with this.
Dagger in my heart.
Exactly. It is a dagger. Our Hamptons loves preservation. And when we see something like this is so one of a kind. I encourage anyone who can to drive by, walk by, bike ride by, because we don't know how long it will still be there, but it is.
And definitely we'll post the pictures, but yeah, it's worth a look in person. It's just old East Hampton at its best.
At its best. There's nothing else to add to that. But here's where we're going to move into from the Apaquogue, because at the time, now remember, we're in the early part of the 20th century, and East Hampton, believe it or not, now was a resort economy. It's always had a very strong resort economy, and it did so even then. But there was, and Esperanza I know knows that there was a shortage of places to stay.
Yeah, and this, let's clarify that this really that summer resort industry really began when the train started coming to a certain point in the area and then was extended through to Montauk. So that really helped the people with their travels out here.
Exactly. It was really, especially at this time, I mean, this was really not to get into an automobile history lesson, but this was the early period of auto transit. There obviously wasn't an LIE in Manorville, I mean, it was all about the train. And that is what brought the summer colony out there. But being as there wasn't a lot of lodging, what happened was the villagers, the people, the residents saw this as, for lack of a better word, an opportunity. And they would rent their village properties to the summer people coming in, and they would decamp, no pun intended, to their summer camps, which were primarily on the eastern shore of 3 Mile Harbor. Now, Esperanza, you've driven up and down 3 Mile Harbor a zillion times. You've seen the remnants of these houses. And
oh yeah, I mean, I used to spend a lot of time there. We had a boat long ago, and spent a lot of time on 3 Mile Harbor. And actually, getting to your point, I mean, one of our neighbors in the village, that was their life. They would rent out their main house in the village and decamp, as you say, down to their little camp on 3 Mile Harbor.
Wow.
And I got to know that place really, really well. I mean, it's now a year-round home, but oh my gosh, what a delight to have this, the view and the access to the water, and very simple, no amenities.
Right. Now, so you actually, the people that you knew at the time, you were actually went to their camp. So you're intimate.
Yeah, it was hand, they were hands.
Okay. Now there's a hand lane in Amagansett. If you go to the Wainscott Cemetery, so yes, this is a very old family Esperanza is referring to. So was it, many of these camps, correct me if I'm wrong, were unheated. They were summer camps.
Yeah, summer camps. Yeah. Or, even if they were in winter use, like people would go down duck hunting or whatever they were hunting at the time, or even fishing, they would use them, and they'd have whatever, a stove, that was kind of the one source of heat, and right. Not much else, no running water perhaps, or, very little else.
Exactly. And, reading Sylvia Mendelman's just wonderful book, it was written about 20 years ago, all about 3 Mile Harbor, perfectly titled 3 Mile Harbor, East Hampton's Treasure. And she has actually a page about the summer camps. And to your point, what you were making about the hands, these campers became a very close-knit community. It was a very, it was exclusive in its own way. It was sort of the same people went every year after year. They rented their houses and decamped here, and really developed very strong friendships. And reading some of these names, it is like a who's who of old East Hampton. You'll recognize these names, Esperanza: Tillinghast, Osborne, Mulford, Dayton, Hurland, Miller, just Reutershan, all of these old names. And they just spent time, and these cottages are still there. Again, winterized. Some have been leveled and replaced by, we'll leave that out. You know what I mean, right?
I do.
That could be our code from moving forward on our Hamptons. But so I guess that it raises the other interesting question, which really is in our bio, how we both claim that we're not claim. It's not a claim. It's a fact. We're not Bonacers. Bonacers didn't originate from Queens, New York, where I'm from, or from where you're from originally.
Yeah, I think you had to be born and raised in the Apaquogue Harbor area.
I always remember the line in the East Hampton Star. Once had a story about this, or maybe I heard it somewhere else, but about the person who was born on Pelham Parkway or the Grand Concourse and moved here when he was 2 or 3 weeks old, spent his entire life here, died at 90 or 91 years old. And the obituary would say Bronx man dies in East Hampton. So I guess that's Bonac. That's the culture. Would you say, Esperanza?
Yes. No, you definitely, it has to have been, you were born, not even at Southampton Hospital. Let's put it that way. You had to have been born right in the house by Apaquogue Harbor.
Exactly. Now, so the term Bonacers, and that's a great segue. It's about being around Apaquogue Harbor. So tell us a little bit about that background where you can, what it means and everything else.
Well, you mentioned we started with Georgica, and I forgot to say about, which is a piece of history that I didn't really know about until more recently, is the name Georgica came allegedly from a Native American man who lived in that area of Georgica, and his name was Georgica. It was a different spelling, but that's where it derived. And I had always thought Georgica, maybe it came from the British, King George kind of thing.
Right.
And that's where that came from. And so with Apaquogue Harbor, which is in Springs, that actually also is a Montaukett Algonquian derived name, which is a term for, it's called root place. In other words, not where you're rooted, which is an interesting sort of aside, but a place of ground nuts, which we presume refers to potatoes, or is there some other tuber or, acorn or nut of some kind?
But great question. We'd have to find a real Bonacer to answer.
I think, well, that's the interpretation that I guess is commonly used. But anyway, that's where the term Bonacers comes from, is from Apaquogue.
Right. And of course, it's the name of the East Hampton high school sports teams.
Yes.
And interestingly, I guess to sort of make a differentiation, Springs calls themselves, and their fire department are the original Bonacers, as if they're the upstreeters, the village people.
Yep.
No.
Yeah, not those ones that rented their houses and came down to camp.
Exactly. Those aren't the original.
Even those were outsiders,
Bonacers,
right?
Which I think is a cool aside. And to sort of close this whole dialogue up, even where I also always wondered, how did 3 Mile Harbor get its name? Why?
Because it's not 3 miles wide or long or anything, right?
And basically, from everything I read in Sylvia Mendelman's book, it was because the head of the harbor is about 3 miles from East Hampton Village. And
is that right?
Yeah. So on that note, that sort of tells that little bit of story. And that was a good journey, Esperanza. We really went from the ocean all the way to Apaquogue Harbor.
Seriously. And we could go on and on and on, because, we could do a whole segment on Bonac and Bonacers and the language which has been lost, this whole yesh bub.
Yes,
which
exactly.
I grew up with and miss. It is, whenever I hear somebody speak even remotely Bonac, I get excited.
and to that point, not only the dialect and the language, the recipes and
oh my gosh, yeah.
But you're right, that that could be a mini series. I mean, there is just it's fascinating, the culture, and I love this place. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, well, and we need to talk about these things more, because this is what roots us and gives us our sense of place. And boy, if you ever want a local potato, that is nothing better than a local potato. Long Island.
Right. And especially when it was grown in Bridgehampton loam. Right?
Exactly.
Esperanza, thank you so much for this great
Love
dialogue.
Talking to you.
That
oh my gosh.
Much fun.
So much fun. And let's keep talking about Bonacers. Go Bonac.
Bonac forever.
See you, Irwin. See you
Bye,
soon.
Esperanza. Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.